Hebrews 10:25 says, "Forsake not the assembling of yourselves together." Especially when you see the last days approaching. The reality is that many of us don't want to come to church and don't want to be in church because we think it's boring or whatever. But if you really think about it, unless you put yourself in an environment that can encourage you to do good, then would you ever really do it on your own? You might, to a point. Anything you do by yourself eventually fades away. The story is told of a man who had joined a church, become baptized, and he was in the congregation and joined church. And all of a sudden he got it in his head that, hey, I can praise God all by myself. I don't need these people to do what I'm going to do. So he goes home, decides to stay home. And as his fellow believers meet at church for worship, he's home. He convinces himself that I can worship by myself. I don't need to be in the company of others to experience the presence of God, which is true. We all ought to worship every day. Paul exhorts us to. But the reality is, coming together is what the Bible asks you to do. So he's home, he's by himself. Pastor for the church realizes that the brother that they just baptized, for some reason, has stopped coming to church after a few months. He calls him up and he goes by and he visits him. And when he gets there, he finds the man in a jovial spirit, invites the pastor in, and they both sit down in two chairs facing the fireplace. The pastor asks him, "Why haven't you come back to church?" He says, "Well, Pastor, I just realized that I don't really need to be in church in order to be a child of God. I can serve God all by myself. I don't need the company of my fellow believers." The pastor sat for a while and said nothing to him. They sat in silence for a while. Eventually, the pastor got up, walked to the fire, took the fire poker and pulled one of the embers that was burning amongst the others away from the fire, off to the side, sat back down, and they watched for a while. The ember, when it was by itself, it burned for a little bit. Because it was not closely associated to the rest of the wood that was burning on the fireplace, eventually the flame on it petered out. And then it smoldered, it glowed for a while, then even the glow itself faded away. It became just another piece of black charcoal sitting in the fireplace, but not in the fire. It sat by itself. The rest of the flame burned brightly and continued to burn brightly, but it sat by itself and burnt out. The pastor didn't have to say anything after that. He just simply stood up, looked at the man, and said, "You decide," and walked out the door. The next Sabbath, the man was in church. So none of us can do this by ourselves. Especially as the world gets worse, we need each other to encourage each other to do what's best, not just in our own lives, but for the Lord. Hezekiah Walker's song says it best. I love you, or I need you, you need me. We're all a part of God's great family. God bless.